Today we're going to learn how to multiply two-digit numbers using an area model. Please make sure you cut out and glue both journal sheets into your math journal before beginning. Also make sure that you have a pencil and a highlighter handy to fill in your journal sheets. Now let's begin. One thing is important to remember is that multiplication is simply repeated addition. For example, if we were to look at the math fact 3 times 4, all we're saying is that we are taking 3 and we are adding it together 4 times. So it's representing repeated addition. We're going to use another method to represent multiplication. We're going to use something called an array. An array is a pictorial representation of a multiplication problem. So for example, if we were looking at the math fact 4 times 5, we could say that in two different ways. We could say that we have 4 groups of 5 or 5 groups of 4. Take a minute at this time to pause the video to make sure that you fill in your journal sheet before we move on to the bottom section of the page. Like we said, an array is a pictorial representation of a multiplication fact. So if we were looking at the math fact 4 times 5, we would need to draw a picture to represent that. In the boxes below, I've drawn 2 arrays to represent the math fact 4 times 5. And you notice in this one, we have 5 columns of 4 each. And in this grid, we also have 5 columns of 4 each. These are just 2 different ways that we could represent that math fact by creating an array. Now at the bottom here, let's look at some of our math fact vocabulary. The 2 digits, or the 2 numbers that we are multiplying by each other to get to our answer are called factors. And do you remember what the answer is called to a multiplication problem? Yep, you guessed it. It is called a product. Now pause the video while you fill in your worksheet before we move on to the next slide. Now, drawing an area model is kind of an amped up version of drawing an array. So if you look at this picture here, and when you look at this multiplication fact, 3 times 5, if I were to draw an array to represent that, I would probably identify 3 rows of 5, just like this. And we wouldn't think anything of it. An area model is going to be doing the same thing, but it gets a little more complicated when we are doing 2-digit by 2-digit numbers. One of the most important things to remember is that when multiplying 2-digit by 2-digit numbers and using an area model is we are multiplying all parts of the number, this number, by all parts of this number. The first thing that we will need to do is break each one of these numbers down by their place value. So let's start with 13. If I were to break 13 down to place value, expanded form, I would get 10 plus 3. So I'm going to put 10 plus 3 up here at the top. And if I were to break 15 down into place value, I would get 10 plus 5. So I'm going to put 15 along this side. 10 plus 5. So let's look at these first 2 numbers. If I were to multiply 10 times 10, I would draw an array to represent that. I would have to identify 10 rows of 10 columns, and that's going to give me 100 squares. But I also have to multiply this 10 by this 3, which is going to give me another 3 columns of 10, giving me an additional 30. But I can't forget this 5 down here. So in addition to that, I'm going to need to draw another 10 columns of 5. Oops, let's go back. 10 columns of 5, not 4. because I'm multiplying 5 times 10 here, and that's going to give me an additional 50. And finally, I'm going to have to multiply our 5 times 3, or it's going to give me another 3 columns of 5. And that's going to, there would be 15 blocks in here. Now, when I add all of these numbers up, I'm going to get 100 plus 50 is 150, 150 plus 30 is 180, and 180 plus 15 would give me my answer of 195. We're going to use these same skills, but less blocks, as we move into multiplication using a generic rectangle. Pause the video while you fill in this worksheet. In this video, you have learned how to multiply two-digit numbers using an area model.